There were rats. From wall to wall, floor to ceiling, there were rats. The cages were crammed full of them. They clung to the wire in front and to the ceilings. The netting strained with the weight. Glistening bodies boiled and tumbled, paws and noses thrusting through the holes. The air was solid with squeaking and rustling and chittering, and it stank. What was left of Hammond Pork's exploration party were clustered in the middle of the room. Most of it had fled by now. If the smells in that room had been sounds, there would have been shouts and screams, thousands of them. They filled the long room with a strange kind of pressure. Even Maurice could feel it as soon as Keith broke down the door. It was like a headache outside of your head trying to get in. It banged on the ears. Maurice was staying a little way behind. You didn't need to be very clever to see that this was a bad situation, and one which might need some running away from at any time. He saw, between their legs, Darktan and Hammond Pork, and a few other changelings. They were in the middle of the floor, looking up at the cages. He was amazed to see that even Hammond Pork was trembling, but he was trembling with rage. "Let them out," he shouted up to Keith. "Let them all out! Let them all out now!" "Another talking rat," said Militia. "Let them out!" Hammond Pork screamed. "I did say about the wire netting," said Keith. "Look, you can see where it's been repaired. They gnawed through wire to escape." "I said, let them out!" screamed Hammond Pork. "Let them out or I will kill you! Evil! Evil! Evil!" "But they're just rats," said Militia. Hammond Pork leapt and landed on the girl's dress. He swarmed up towards her neck. She froze. He hissed, "There are rats eating one another in there. I will gnaw you, you evil—" Keith's hand grasped him firmly around the waist and pulled him off her neck. Screeching, hair bristling, Hammond Pork sunk his teeth into Keith's finger. Militia gasped. Even Maurice winced. Hammond Pork drew his head back, blood dripping from his muzzle, and blinked in horror. Tears welled up in Keith's eyes. Very carefully, he put Hammond Pork down on the floor. "It's the smell," he said quietly. "It upsets them." I thought you said they were tame," said Militia, able to speak at last. She picked up a lump of wood that was leaning against the cages. Keith knocked it out of her hand. "Never, ever threaten one of us." "He attacked you." "Look around. This is not a story. This is real, do you understand? They're frightened out of their minds." "How dare you talk to me like that?" Militia shouted. "I Urkel will." "Ha! One of us, eh? Was that a rat swear word? Do you even swear in rat, rat boy?" Just like cats, Maurice thought. You stand face to face and scream at one another. His ears swiveled as he heard another sound in the distance. Someone was coming down the ladder. Maurice knew from experience that this was no time to talk to humans. They always said things like, "What?" and "That's not right," or "Where?" "Get out of here right now," he said as he ran past Darktan. "Don't get human about it, just run." And that was quite enough heroism, he decided. It didn't pay to let other people actually slow you down. There was a rusty old drain set in the wall. He skidded on the slimy floor as he changed direction. And there, yes, was a Morris-sized hole where a bar had rusted clean away. Paws scrabbling for speed, he darted through the hole, just as the rat catchers entered the room of cages. Then, safe in darkness, he turned around and peered out. Time to check. Was Maurice safe? All legs present? Tail? Yes. Good. He could see Darktan tugging at Hammond Pork, who seemed to have frozen on the spot, the others scuttling towards another drain on the opposite wall. They moved unsteadily. That's what happens when you let yourself go, Maurice thought. They thought they'd got educated, but in a tight corner, a rat is just a rat. Now, me, I'm different. Brain functioning perfectly at all times, always on the lookout, on the case and sniffing bottom. The caged rats were making a din. Keith and the storytelling girl were watching the rat catchers in amazement. The rat catchers weren't unamazed either. On the floor, Darktan gave up trying to get Hammond Pork to move. He drew his sword, looked up at the humans, hesitated, and then ran for the drain. Yeah, let them sort it out. They're all human, Maurice thought. They've got big brains. They can talk. Should be no problem at all. Ha! Tell him a story, storytelling girl. Ratcatcher 1 stared at Militia and Keith. "What are you doing here, miss?" he said, his voice creaking with suspicion. "Playing mummies and daddies," said Ratcatcher 2 cheerfully. "You broke into our shed," said Ratcatcher 1. That's called breaking in, that is.
You've been stealing, yes, stealing food and blaming it on rats, snapped Militia. And why have you got all these rats caged up in here? And what about the aglets, eh? Surprised, eh? Didn't think anyone would notice them, eh?
Aglets, said Ratcatcher 1, his brow wrinkling. The little bits on the end of bootlaces, mumbled Keith. Ratcatcher 1 spun around. You bloody idiot, Bill. I said we've had enough real ones. I told you someone would notice. Didn't I tell you someone would notice? Someone has noticed.
Yes, and don't think you've gotten away with anything, said Militia.
Her eyes were gleaming.
I know you're only the humorous thugs. One big fat one, one thin one. It's obvious. So, who's the big boss?
Ratcatcher 1's eyes glazed slightly, as they often did when Militia talked to people. He waved a fat finger at her. You know what your father's been and gone and done just now, he said.
Ha! Humorous thug talk, said Militia triumphantly. Do go on.
Hey, he's been and gone and sent off for the rat piper, said Ratcatcher 2. He costs a fortune. $300 a town, and if you don't pay up, he gets really mean. Oh dear, thought Maurice. Someone's been and gone and sent for the real one. $300. $300. $300. We only charge $30. It's you, isn't it? Said Ratcatcher 1, waving his finger at Keith. The stupid-looking kid. You turn up and suddenly there's all these new rats around. There's something I don't like about you. You and your funny-looking cat. If I see that funny-looking cat again, it's going to have mittens. In the darkness of the drain, Maurice shrank back. Ha ha ha, said Ratcatcher 2. He'd probably studied to get a thug laugh like that, Maurice thought. And we don't have a boss, said Ratcatcher 1. Yeah, we're our own bosses, said Ratcatcher 2. And then the story went wrong. And you, miss, said Ratcatcher 1, turning to Militia, are too lippy by half. He swung his fist, lifting her off her feet and slamming her against the rat cages. The rats went mad, and the cages boiled with frantic activity as she slumped to the ground. The Ratcatcher turned to Keith. You gonna try anything, kid? He said. You gonna try anything? She was a girl, so I was nice and kind. But you, I'll put in one of the cages. Yeah, and they ain't been fed today, said a delighted Ratcatcher 2. Go on, kid, Maurice thought. Do something. But Keith just stood there, staring at the man. Ratcatcher 1 looked him up and down scornfully. What's that you got there, boy? A pipe? Give it here. The pipe was grabbed from Keith's belt, and he was pushed to the floor. A penny whistle! Think you're the rat piper, do ya? Ratcatcher 1 snapped the pipe in two and tossed the bits inside the cages. You know, they say that over in Pork Scratches, the rat piper led all the kids out of the town. Now there was a man with the right idea. Keith looked up. His eyes narrowed. He got to his feet. Here it comes, thought Maurice. He's going to leap forward with superhuman strength because he's so angry, and they're going to wish he'd never been born. Keith leapt forward with ordinary human strength, landed one punch on Ratcatcher 1, and was smacked to the floor again by a big, brutal sledgehammer blow. All right, he got knocked down, thought Maurice as Keith struggled for breath. But he's going to get up again. There was a shrill scream, and Maurice thought, aha! But the scream hadn't come from a wheezing Keith. A grey figure had launched itself from the top of the rat cages, right at the Ratcatcher's face. It landed, teeth first, and blood spurted on the Ratcatcher's nose. Aha, thought Maurice again. It's Hammond Pork to the rescue. What? Brrr, I'm thinking like the girl. I keep thinking it's a story. The Ratcatcher grabbed at the rat and held him out at arm's length by his tail. Hammond Pork twisted and turned, squealing with rage. His captor dabbed at his nose with his spare hand, and stared at Hammond Pork as he struggled. He's a bit of a fighter, said Ratcatcher 2. How'd he get out? Not one of ours, said Ratcatcher 1. He's red. Red? What's red about him? A red rat's a kind of grey rat, as you would well know if you were an experienced guild member like me, said the Ratcatcher. They ain't local. You get 'em down on the plains. Funny to find one up here. Very funny. Greasy old devil too, but game as anything. Your nose is all runny. Yeah, I know. I've had more rat bites than you've had hot dinners. Don't feel 'em anymore, said Ratcatcher 1, in a voice that suggested that the spinning, screeching Hammond Pork was a lot more interesting than his colleague. I only have cold sausage for dinner. There you are then. What a little fighter you are, to be sure. Real little devil, aren't you? Plucky as anything. Kind of you to say so. I was talking to the rat, mister. He prodded Keith with his boot. Go and tie up these two somewhere, okay? We'll put them in one of the other cellars for now. One with a proper door and a proper lock and no handy little trapdoors. And you give me the key. She's the mayor's daughter, said Ratcatcher 2. Mayors can get really upset about daughters. Then he'll do what he's told, right? You going to give that rat a good squeezing? What, a fighter like this one? Are you joking? It's thinking like that that'll keep you a Ratcatcher's assistant your whole life. I've got a much better idea. How many's in the, special cage? Maurice watched Ratcatcher 2 go and examine one of the other cages on the far wall. Only 2 rats left. They've eaten the other 4, he reported. Just skin left. Very neat. Ah, so they'll be full of vim and vinegar. We'll see what they do to him, shall we? Maurice heard a little wire door open and shut. Hammond Pork was seeing red. It filled his vision. He'd been angry for months, down inside. Angry at humans. Angry at the poisons and the traps. Angry at the way the younger rats weren't showing respect. Angry that the world was changing so fast and that he was growing old. And now the smells of terror and hunger and violence met the anger coming the other way, and they mingled and flowed through Hammond Pork in a great red river of rage. He was a cornered rat. But he was a cornered rat who could think. He'd always been a vicious fighter, long before there was all this thinking, and he was still very strong. A couple of dumb, swanking young kikis with no tactics and no experience of down and dirty cellar fighting, and no fancy footwork and no thoughts, were simply not a contest. A tumble, a twist, and 2 bites were all it took. The caged rats across the room leapt back from the netting. Even they could feel the fury. Now there's a clever boy, said Ratcatcher 1 admiringly when it was all over. I've got a use for you, my lad. Not the pit, said Ratcatcher 2. Yes, the pit. Tonight? Yeah, 'cause Fancy Arthur's putting his Jacko on a bet to kill 100 rats in less than a quarter of an hour. I bet he can too. Jacko's a good terrier. He did 90 a few months ago and Fancy Arthur's been training him up. Should be a good show. You'd bet on Jacko doing it, would ya? Said Ratcatcher 1. Sure, everyone will be. Even with our little friend here among the rats, said Ratcatcher 1. Full of lovely spite and bite and boiling bile. Well, yeah, right, Ratcatcher 1 grinned. I don't like leaving those kids here, though. It's them kids, not those kids. Get it right. How many times have I told you, Rule 27 of the Guild? Sounds stupid. People get suspicious of rat catchers that talk too good. Sorry. Talk thick, be clever. That's the way to do it, said Ratcatcher 1. Sorry, I forgot. You tend to do it the other way around. Sorry, them kids. It's cruel tying people up. They're only kids after all. So it would be a lot easier to take 'em down the tunnel to the river and hit 'em on the head and throw 'em in. They'll be miles down the river before anyone fishes 'em out, and they'll probably not even be recognisable by the time the fish are finished with 'em. Maurice heard a pause in the conversation. Ratcatcher 1 said, I didn't know you were such a kind-hearted soul, Bill. Right, and sorry, and I've got an idea about getting rid of this piper too. The next voice came from everywhere. It sounded like a rushing wind, and in the heart of the wind, the groan of something in agony. It filled the air. No, we can use the piper. No, we can use the piper, said Ratcatcher 1. That's right, said Ratcatcher 2. I was just thinking the same thing. How can we use the piper? Once again, Maurice heard a sound in his head, like wind blowing through a cave. Isn't it obvious? Isn't it obvious? Said Ratcatcher 1. Yeah, obvious, muttered Ratcatcher 2. Obviously it's obvious. Maurice watched the ratcatchers open several of the cages, grab rats, and drop them into a sack. He saw Hammond Pork tipped into one too, and then the ratcatchers had gone, dragging the other humans with them. And Maurice wondered, where in this maze of cellars is a Maurice-sized hole? Cats can't see in the dark. What they can do is see in very little light. A tiny scrap of moonlight was filtering into the space behind him. It was coming through a tiny hole in the ceiling, barely big enough for a mouse, and certainly not big enough for a Maurice, even if he could reach it. It illuminated another cellar. By the looks of it, the ratcatchers had used this one too. There were a few barrels stacked in one corner, and piles of broken rat cages. Maurice prowled around it, looking for another way out. There were doors, but they had handles, and even his mighty brain hadn't figured out the mystery of doorknobs. There was another drain grating in a wall, though. He squeezed through it. Another cellar, and more boxes and sacks. At least it was dry, though. A voice behind him said, "What kind of thing are you?" He spun around. All he could make out were boxes and sacks. The air still stank of rats. There was a continuous rustling, and the occasional faint squeak, but the place was still a little piece of heaven compared to the hell of the cage room. The voice had come from behind him, hadn't it? He must have heard it, mustn't he? Because it seemed to him that he'd just had something like the memory of hearing a voice, something that had arrived in his head without bothering to go through his ragged ears. It had been the same with the rat catchers. They'd talked as if they'd heard a voice and thought it was their own thoughts. The voice hadn't really been there, had it? "I can't see you," said the memory. "I don't know what you are." It was not a good voice for a memory to have. It was all hisses, and it slid into the mind like a knife. "Come closer." Maurice's paws twitched. The muscles in his legs started to push him forward. He extended his claws and got control of himself. Someone was hiding among the boxes, he thought, and it would probably not be a good idea to say anything. People could get funny about talking cats. You couldn't rely on everyone being as mad as the storytelling girl. "Come closer." The voice seemed to pull at him. He'd have to say something. I'm happy where I am, thank you," said Maurice. "Then will you share our pain?" The last word hurt, but it did not, and this was surprising, hurt a lot. The voice had sounded sharp and dramatic, as if the owner was keen to see Maurice rolling in agony. Instead, it gave him a very brief headache. When the voice arrived again, it sounded very suspicious. "What kind of creature are you? Your mind is wrong." "I prefer amazing," said Maurice. "Anyway, who are you asking me questions in the dark?" All he could smell was rat. He heard a faint sound off to his left, and just made out the shape of a very large rat creeping towards him. Another sound made him turn. Another rat was coming from the other direction. He could only just make it out in the gloom. A rustle ahead of him suggested that there was a rat right in front, slipping quietly through the dark. "Here come my eyes." "What? Cat! Cat! Kill!"